Hello. Thank you for coming. I'm going out to clean the pasture spring. I'll only stop to rake the leaves away and wait to watch the water clear, I may. I shan't be gone long. You come too. I'm going out to fetch the little calf that's standing by the mother. It's so young, it totters when she licks it with her tongue. I shan't be gone long. You come too. Thank you for coming with me to clean the pasture spring this morning. We won't be gone long, but it might be a little more than an hour. So we're going to take a little intermission at 11 o'clock, no matter where we are in the program, in case anybody has to stretch or leave. But I expect it'll run about an hour and 15 minutes. I've done poetry programs for you in the past of my own poetry and Robert Frost, but I've never done it based on your requests. So you did the hard part for me this time. It's always been the hardest part for me to figure out which poems to choose. So thank you for doing that part. Now I know that each poem that I do today, at least one person out there wants to hear it. And in order to keep it moving as well as possible, I ask that if you have any inclination to clap, hold it till the end. We'll have ready then. So this next poem we're going to do was requested 3 times. And that wasn't a big surprise to me because this is one of Robert's most famous poems. But if you will do an internet search about the most misunderstood English language poem, you will no doubt come up with this one. This one is often misunderstood. And I think it's because, just like we all do, we look at the last line and we lean on that for meaning. But if you look at the title and think about the words, it might be less about the road less traveled than it is about the road that we didn't take. 2 roads diverged. Whoops, yeah, I have it. I'm sorry I couldn't get a yellow picture, but this is the best I could do. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no steps had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I would ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. I think we all sort of like to take the road that we think is a little less traveled. This next poem is my take on choosing a different road. I wrote this next poem while I was commuting to my job in Mechanicsburg from Lancaster. So I had a long drive. And I was working with refugees at the time, refugees and immigrants, and one of the things that I often did was take them to the state health center. So there's a reference in the middle of the poem to a waiting room. That's where I was with some of my clients when I saw the woman that I refer to in the poem. When I take Route 441 to work, in lieu of faster, more efficient routes, I feel as though I'm going somewhere else. or even that I might be someone else. Like the woman I met once in a waiting room with a bevy of freckled children waiting for shots. They were from here, near the river, maybe Bainbridge. All but the youngest one went in alone and came back proudly brandishing an arm. The speckled sycamore borne by the water has arms like that. She had them too, a mother's muscled arms, the kind of arms that pick you up at night and carry you in from the car when you're asleep. I've been on the receiving end of those, but never on the lifting. Unless you count the lifting down of furniture from a truck and up 1,000 flights of stairs to furnish countless rooms for refugees. We social workers are a kind of mother, but not the kind that lives down by the water and raises children purely for the pleasure, or so I can imagine if I want to. I even have a trailer all picked out with a rusty car beside it and a boat that hooks the river like a comma for me to rest my mind on every time. And where I go, or where I let it take me, all up and down the wet, wide Susquehanna, wild and serene and everything between, I couldn't even tell you if I had to. I only know it's not where I'm supposed to. I don't condone going where you're not supposed to, but going not where you're supposed to go is a different joy, and I do recommend it. As long as you get there eventually, just by a different road and on your own time, the way some people get to church. Or even I was going to say to heaven, but that I guess should be another poem. I see no harm, and maybe an advantage. You may be late, but you get better mileage. Now we're going to shift focus to trees. One of the things I share with Robert Frost is a love of trees. I think sometimes about half of his poems seem to feature trees in some way. There's so much about trees. So I think you must like trees too, because we got at least 6 requests that feature trees. So the next 6 poems all feature trees in some way. Tree at my window. This is actually a tree at my window. Tree at my window, window tree. My sash is lowered when night comes on, but let there never be curtain drawn between you and me. Vague dream head lifted out of the ground, and thing next most diffuse to cloud. Not all your light tongues talking aloud could be profound. But tree, I have seen you taken and tossed, and if you have seen me when I have slept, you have seen me when I was taken and swept, and all but lost. The day she put our heads together, fate had her imagination about her. Your head so much concerned with outer, mine with inner weather. This next poem is my own poem, and it's about my family. It's based on a story that my Uncle Marty Longenecker told us at a family reunion a couple of decades ago. I was probably in my 30s, and I thought it was such a good story, I had to capture it somehow in a poem to remember it better. Marty, he was an incredible storyteller, and it refers to an argument or a disagreement or a tension between him and his cousin Henry Longenecker. They both worked at the butcher shop in Middletown. This is a picture of the house, and there on the left is the pear tree from which the story's told. I tell it from the perspective of the pear tree. Some of you know some of my family. Helen, who requested the poem, says she knows my family somewhat. I've had many relatives who've lived here and died here, and some who still live here. My mother is living here now in Cedar. Hi, Mom. She's watching from her television. And my Uncle Ed, who would be Marty's brother, Marty Longenecker, and his wife Rhoda, live out in their cottage, and they're watching from their TV because Ed's under the weather today. I have an Aunt Irene here, and her husband John was here. Just lots of connections here. This is just about one little story in our family. And my dad took the picture there. My dad is Dan Longenecker. He died in 2020. I am the tree that bears the amber pears down the long lane next to the empty house that stares at where there used to be a barn and bears its absence like a widowed spouse. I am the tree, the Kiefer canning pear. My fruit selected sweet was bred to last, to line the cellars of the coming year, for when the future hungers for the past. I am the tree that sees the end of things. Why I am left to see it, I don't know. A few come down the lane to watch with me, but not as many as the years would owe. We talk about it sometimes. The pecan has seen it from a slightly different angle. He saw it from the side door, I the front. Together we saw things we can't untangle. And out in back, the bittersweet saw things that neither of us saw. When Papa died, she saw the way the cattle tiptoed near and kissed his forehead. She says they even cried. I don't believe the cows cried, actually. Cows just look sad. That's just the way cows look. As long as they have grass, though, they don't mind what else the good Lord gave or who he took. Why Papa went to check on them at all so late that night, I never understood. Maybe he felt a restlessness like theirs and thought he'd try to settle what he could. The only thing he settled, though, that night was his own heart. It never rose again. That is, until his grandsons found him there and bore him home up the back steps, and then they laid him finally in the living room. Living was all they asked of him that night, and he'd have given it them, I know he would, if it had been a thing within his might. Now let's not lose our grip here, he'd have said, I'll be all right. Mama, let go my hand, you're hurting me. And then she would have cried, relieved at what she now wouldn't have to stand. And yet she would so stand it, 18 years. She was as strong as he was every bit. I remember the first time I realized her strength. I overheard more than encountered it. They were all standing by the kitchen door, Papa and Cousin Henry, Papa's cousin, and Mama and Marty, their oldest son. And Dan, he may have been there, but I think he wasn't. The argument was on the type of meat or how much salt to use in making souse, or was it scrapple? My memory's not clear. I only know the tension in the house went well beyond the kitchen door that day. All we with branches felt it to the pith. It wasn't fists or even angry words, but innuendos they were fighting with. Papa said, look, our recipe is fine. It don't need change. Leave well enough alone. Of course, Henry thinks he has to interfere. It's in his genes. I guess I should have known. Now, Henry clearly had a thing to say. I heard the intake of his breath, the hiss, but Marty, bless his heart for one so young, said, Pop, please leave Aunt Renee out of this. Aunt Renee was the source of the said genes. She was Pop's aunt and Cousin Henry's mother. She'd also nearly married Pop's Pop once, but then had gone and married his younger brother, Henry's father. You see the way it was? Not only tender feelings run so true between the generations like a thread, but the taut cords of jealousy run too. And Papa, like a boy at tug-of-war, bore down, dug in, and gave it all his weight. Don't talk so dumb, that's dumb talk, he declared. The end of every argument to date, and would have been the end of this one too. That cord was thick and heavy as spun lead, but tore more than his fingers, Mama knew. "Papa, you know he's right," was all she said. I don't remember what the outcome was in terms of scrapple recipes or souse, and I'm not saying it was the last time there was that kind of tension in the house, but Papa listened. Henry listened too. Their silence wasn't, but it seemed so long. My sympathies were everywhere at once. Which way is harder, to be right or wrong? Then someone broke the tension with a cough, said milking time, and pushed aside a chair. I heard Pop say as he went out the door, "Where'd she get so wise?" As if it wasn't fair. Oh, what a memory. What a family. And no pun intended, what a family tree. I swear if I'd have loved them anymore, they would have had to take an axe to me. But they're all gone now, died or moved away. I miss their voices in the morning air, the slamming of the doors, the barking dogs, the tall ones reaching up to pluck a pear. Sometimes I think I feel the tugging still, like phantom pains, I guess, with amputees. The cherry says, accept it, there's no cure, that's just the way it is with family trees, and that I'll love again. I'll love again. I say it to myself. But I confess I dread the renovations in the house. I'd almost rather bear the emptiness. And speaking of good things not lasting, this one is a famous Frost poem, "Nothing Gold Can Stay." Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf. So Eden sank to grief. So dawn comes down to day. Nothing gold can stay. But thankfully also some of those bad things also don't stay. Like back to the family tree poem, I'm so grateful that that tension, that jealousy was never passed on. We didn't even have a clue that there was any tension at all between Henry and Papa. They were the best of friends. So that did not get passed on. So thankfully, even though some things gold can stay, some things lead can also not stay. And I want you to just notice, or I want to point out the heroine in that story, my grandma. All she said was, "You know he's right." She's one of my heroes, and I hope I become like her when I get older as she was. I got to spend a lot of time with her when she was an older woman. And I want to just point out, too, the unappreciated, unnoticed woman behind Robert Frost that we often don't think about. Her name was Eleanor White. And she was an amazing person. And I honestly think that we would not have the poetry we have if it hadn't been for her. He said he wrote everything for her. And he said at one point that she was the other half of everything he ever wrote, and sometimes both halves. In other words, I think she gave him some of the words and some of the lines and some of the ideas, and definitely was his best critic and editor. So thank you, Eleanor White and Robert Frost, for these poems. The next two poems, let's see, share a line toward heaven. So listen for that line in each of the next two poems. This is one of the most famous poems that Robert ever wrote, Birches. When I see birches bend to left and right across the line of straighter, darker trees, I like to think some boy's been swinging them. But swinging doesn't bend them down to stay as ice storms do. Often you must have seen them loaded with ice a sunny winter morning after a rain. They click upon themselves as the breeze rises and turn many-colored as the stir cracks and crazes their enamel. Soon the sun's warmth makes them shed crystal shells, shattering and avalanching on the snow crust, such heaps of broken glass to sweep away you'd think the inner dome of heaven had fallen. They are dragged to the withered bracken by the load, and they seem not to break, though once they're bowed so low for long they never right themselves. You can see them arching their trunks in the woods years afterwards, trailing their leaves on the ground like girls on hands and knees that throw their hair before them over their head to dry in the sun. But I was going to say, when truth broke in with all her matter-of-fact about the ice storms, I should prefer to have some boy bend them while going out and in to fetch the cows. Some boy too far from town to learn baseball, whose only play was what he found himself, summer or winter, and could play alone. One by one, he subdued his father's trees by riding them down over and over again till he had worn the stiffness out of them, and not one but hung limp, not one was left for him to conquer. He learned all there was to learn about not launching out too soon and so not carrying the tree away clear to the ground. He always kept his poise to the top branches, climbing carefully with the same pains you use to fill a cup up to the brim and even above the brim. Then he flung outward, feet first, with a swish, kicking his way down through the air to the ground. So was I once myself, a swinger of birches. And so I dream of going back to be. It's when I'm weary of considerations and life is too much like a pathless wood where your face burns and tickles with the cobwebs broken across it and one eye's weeping from a twig's having lashed across it open. I'd like to get away from earth a while and then come back to it again and begin over. May no fate willfully misunderstand me and half grant what I wish and snatch me away not to return. Earth's the right place for love. I don't know where it's likely to go better. I'd like to go by climbing a birch tree and climb black branches up a snow-white trunk toward heaven till the tree could bear no more but dipped its top and set me down again. That would be good, both going and coming back. One could do worse than be a swinger of birches. This next one was chosen by Doris Sensnig. I don't know that I've ever said this poem for an audience. It's not one that's frequently requested, but it's a beautiful poem, and it shares that line toward heaven. And I used the first line of this poem as the introduction to my book, How Trees Must Feel, when I published my book, because I got permission from Henry Holt Publishing Company to use Robert Frost's quote in the beginning of my book. So here it is. My long, two-pointed ladder sticking through a tree. Oops, I forgot the picture. Hang on. There we go. My long, two-pointed ladder sticking through a tree toward heaven still. And there's a barrel that I didn't fill beside it, and there may be 2 or 3 apples I didn't pick upon some bough. But I am done with apple picking now. Essence of winter's sleep is on the night, the scent of apples. I am drowsing off. I cannot rub the strangeness from my sight I got from looking through a pane of glass I skinned this morning from the drinking trough and held against the world of hoary grass. It melted, and I let it fall and break. But I was well upon my way to sleep before it fell, and I could tell what form my dreaming was about to take. Magnified apples appear and disappear, stem end and blossom end, and every fleck of russet showing clear. My instep arch not only keeps the ache, it keeps the pressure of the ladder round. I feel the ladder sway as the boughs bend, and I keep hearing from the cellar bin the rumbling sound of load on load of apples coming in. For I have had too much of apple picking. I am overtired. Of a great harvest I myself desired. There were 10,000 fruit to touch, cherish in hand, lift down and not let fall. For all that touched the earth, no matter if not bruised or spiked with stubble, went surely to the cider apple heap as of no worth. One can see what will trouble this sleep of mine, whatever sleep it is. Were he not gone, the woodchuck could say whether it's like his long sleep, as I describe its coming on, or just some human sleep. As we get older, we think more and more about the end of life and how our life might end. And this poem I wrote, my dad was the first person I shared it with when it was finished, and he said it was good. So that was what counted to me. And, you know, in the end, he sort of went like some of the leaves in this poem. In fall, when black oak leaves and sycamore line the wide sidewalk where I walk to work, I like to look to where they've fallen from. I look up, lean way back, there they all cling, deciding when and where and how to drop. Sometimes I stand a while watching one leaf I think is ripe for letting go the tree. I fix on one I think looks kind of tired, the way a child looks fighting sleep, whose eyes droop long before she'll give her tiny hand into her father's to be led to bed. I think perhaps she'll honor me to see the moment when the letting go occurs. God knows I wouldn't tell a soul. I'd keep her secret like I'd keep my own if she would trust me. I know I could keep still when it comes to leaves. Role models are so few and far between for letting go. Sometimes I stand quite close to a low branch or even touch some brown leaves slightly to see if I can figure when they'll plunge. But what I really want to know is how they go so gracefully when done. Like one relinquishes a handshake at the door when talk runs out and all the tea is gone. Leaves look so fine the way they say farewell. A heart-shaped scar, the only sign of pain. They just drop down, they just drop gently down. No tears to make an ointment for a grave. Surrender is all they would have me know. And I am nearly taken in each fall. But I have seen some winters come and go. And I have loved a little. And I know there are more ways to die, Horatio, than fall philosophy has dreamt of. Not always grace sufficient will supply the wherewithal to like it when you die. Some will hang on, past dying into snow, well into winter, even to next year. For some, it takes a great wind from the north. For those who absolutely won't let go, it takes the buds of spring to push them out, like baby teeth. Don't ask me how I know. I'd rather go the first way, though. Truly, I would prefer it. To give a curtsy in my brightest dress and laugh as it swelled out like a balloon. Of course, we'll have to see. I'd rather. But it comforts me to know that if I get all crazy at the end and make a scene, I'm still within the realm of natural things, who also sometimes cling. And speaking of the end of life, there are some practical things that happen at the end of life. We have to decide where we're going to be buried. This next poem, it's actually misprinted on your list. It's not Room for a Third, it's Place for a Third, if you ever want to look it up. The title is Place for a Third, And this poem I've never shared for sure with anyone. I love it. And I'm so grateful to my Aunt Rhoda for requesting it. We were just chatting one day about just, I don't know what all, just back and forth many topics. And one of us mentioned somebody that had been married 3 times. And I said, oh, I know a poem that Frost wrote about somebody that was married 3 times. And she said, oh, let that one be my choice for your program. So this is for Aunt Rhoda, A Place for a Third. I should move on here. Nothing to say to all those marriages. She had made 3 herself to 3 of his. The score was even for them, 3 to 3. But come to die, she found she cared so much. She thought of children in a burial row. 3 children in a burial row was sad. A man's 3 women in a burial row somehow made her impatient with the man. And so she said to Laban, you have done a good deal right. Don't do the last thing wrong. Don't make me lie with those 2 other women. Laban said no, he would not make her lie with anyone, but that she had a mind to if that was how she felt. Of course, he said. She went her way. But Laban, having caught this glimpse of lingering person in Eliza, and anxious to make all he could of it, tried to think how he could exceed his promise and give good measure to the dead, though thankless. His first thought under pressure was a grave and a new bought and grave plot by herself under, he didn't care how great a stone, he'd sell a yoke of steers to pay for it. And weren't there special cemetery flowers that once grief sets to growing, grief may rest. The flowers will go on with grief a while, and no one feel neglecting or neglected. He thought of evergreen and everlasting. And then he had a thought worth many of these. Somewhere must lie the grave of the young boy who had married her for playmate more than helpmate, and sometimes laughed at what it was between them. How would she like to lie her last with him? Where was his grave? Did Laban know his name? He found the grave a town or two away, the gravestone marked with John, beloved husband. Beside it, room reserved, the say a sister's, a never married sister's of that husband's. Whether Eliza would be welcome there? The dead are bound to silence, asked the sister. So Laban found the sister, and saying nothing of where Eliza wanted not to lie and who had thought to lay her with her first love, begged simply for the grave. The sister's face fell all in wrinkles of responsibility. She wanted to do right. She'd have to think. Laban was old and poor, but seemed to care. And she was old and poor, but she cared too. They sat. She cast one dull old look at him, then sent him out to go on other errands while she made up her mind how much she cared and how much Laban cared and why he cared. She made shrewd eyes to see where he came in. She'd looked Eliza up her second time, a widow at her second husband's grave, and offered her a home to rest a while before she went the poor man's widow's way, housekeeping for the next man out of wedlock. She and Eliza had been friends through all. Who was she to judge marriage in a world whose Bible's so confused in marriage counsel? The sister had not come across this Laban, a decent product of life's ironing out. She must not keep him waiting. Time would press between the death day and the funeral day. So when she saw him coming in the street, she hurried her decision to be ready to meet him with his answer at the door, to do, as she had put it, what was right. She gave it through the screen door closed between them. No, not with John. It wouldn't make no sense. Eliza's had too many other men. So Laban was forced to fall back on his plan to buy Eliza a plot to lie alone in. which gives him, for himself, a choice of lots when his time comes to die and settle down. I just love those characters, every one of them, you know, like, talk about heroic, you know, Laban, all that effort on behalf of this wife, and Eliza standing up for herself, and the sister standing up for herself. You know, it's just, Anyway, I'm going to do a program in the spring, in April, a Pathways class about how Robert was so good at making heroes out of ordinary people. That's an example of one, but he does it all the time. So if you're interested in that theme, look for that Pathways class in the spring. Now let's see, we're going to shift focus again to a famous poem called Mending Wall. The man that Robert makes the wall or mends the wall with is his neighbor, Napoleon Guy, or Gay, I'm not sure how to say it, G-U-A-Y. He was a French immigrant, and he makes it into lots of Robert's poems. This is the most famous one that he's in. And I'll let you decide which side Robert is on, or whether he's on either side, building walls or breaking walls down. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen ground swell under it and spills the upper boulders in the sun and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them to make repair where they have left not one stone on a stone. But they would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. The gaps, I mean, no one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time we find them there. I let my neighbor know behind the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and put the wall between us once again. We keep the wall between us as we go, to each the boulders that have fallen to each. And some are loaves, and some so nearly balls we have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game. One on a side, it comes to little more. There where it is, we do not need a wall. He is all pine, and I am apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across to eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. He only says good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but I'd rather he said it for himself. I see him there bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savage, armed. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods alone and the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying. And he likes having thought of it so well, he says again, good fences make good neighbors. That reminds me of my dad used to write down those kinds of phrases that he heard said. None of them were original to anybody that he knew. Phrases like good fences make good neighbors. His dad would say them all the time, and my dad would write them down and call them Papa-isms. But good fences make good neighbors. Yeah. This next poem, though, is on the side of breaking down walls and connecting. We do need both things, don't we? We need some boundaries, but we also definitely need connection. I went to turn the grass once, after one who mowed it in the dew before the sun. The dew was gone that made his blade so keen, before I came to view the leveled scene. I looked for him behind an aisle of trees. I listened for his whetstone on the breeze. But he had gone his way, the grass all mown, and I must be, as he had been, alone. As all must be, I said within my heart, whether we work together or apart. But as I said it, swift there passed me by, on noiseless wing, a bewildered butterfly, seeking with memory grown dim or night, some resting flower of yesterday's delight. And once I marked his flight go round and round to where some flower lay withering on the ground. And then he flew as far as I could see, and then on tremulous wing came back to me. I thought of questions that have no reply, and would have turned to toss the grass to dry. But he turned first, and led my eye to look at a tall tuft of flowers beside a brook. A leaping tongue of bloom the scythe had spared, beside a reedy brook the scythe had bared. The mower in the dew had loved them thus, by leaving them to flourish, not for us, nor yet to draw one thought of ours to him, but from sheer morning gladness at the brim. The butterfly and I had lit upon, nevertheless, a message from the dawn that made me hear the waking birds around, and hear his long scythe whispering to the ground, and feel a spirit kindred to my own, so that henceforth I worked no more alone, but glad with him I worked as with his aid, and weary sought at noon with him the shade, and dreaming, as it were, held brotherly speech with one whose thought I had not hoped to reach. Men work together, I told him from the heart, whether they work together or apart. Now we're going to shift gears to a topic of education. Robert had interesting feelings about education. I don't know how to describe them, but he didn't trust laid-on education. In other words, institutional education. Maybe it was just a justification for why he dropped out of college, I don't know. But he did end up teaching a lot of his life. So, but there's two kinds of education, aren't there, at least? I mean, there's book learning, and then there's learning through life. So this poem was chosen by Helen Hess, who has been an educator in an unusual way in her life. She was telling me the other day, not a traditional teacher, but a teacher nonetheless. So this poem is for Helen. What 50 said. When I was young, my teachers were the old. I gave up fire for form till I was cold. I suffered like a metal being cast. I went to school to age, to learn the past. Now I am old. My teachers are the young. What can't be molded must be cracked and sprung. I strain at lessons fit to start a suture. I go to school to youth, to learn the future. Robert was, in addition to being an educator, he was an amateur ornithologist, an amateur botanist, an amateur geologist, an amateur astronomer. He knew a little bit about everything, a great deal about nothing, as he said once in one of his poems. But these next several poems feature birds. He really was into birds almost as much as trees. There's so many poems that he has birds in. And this one was written for his daughter, Leslie. The subtitle is As Told to a Child. He had 6 children altogether. The oldest one, Elliot, died when he was 3. Then he had Leslie, Carol was a boy, Irma, and Marjorie. So Leslie, this is for Leslie. Oh, and then there was a 6th one that died in childbirth later. So this was for Leslie. As I went out, a crow in a low voice said, "Oh, I was looking for you. I just came to tell Leslie, will you, that her little bluebird wanted me to bring word that the north wind last night that made the stars bright and put ice on the trough almost made him cough his tail feathers off. He just had to fly. But he sent her goodbye, and he said to be good and to wear her red hood and to look for skunk tracks in the snow with an axe and do everything. And perhaps in the spring he would come back and sing." Let's see. This next one was requested by Kathy Boschart or Boschart. I don't know how to say that. Are you here, Kathy? Bozart? Okay. And it was fun that she requested it because I've been memorizing Frost poetry for many decades, and I, a while ago, decided to start reviewing what I know from the beginning to where I'm at, up to page 330 or something like that. And I had sort of stopped memorizing new poetry. And when she requested this, I thought, oh, I don't know that one. So I looked it up, and it's the next one, chronologically, for me to memorize. So it's like, wow. She bumped me into my, ongoing goal of keeping on memorizing. So this is called A Nature Note. It's the most recently memorized poem I have, so I hope I get it right. 4 or 5 whippoorwills came down from their native ledge to the open country edge to give us a piece of their bills. 2 in June were a pair. You would think sufficiently loud. But this was a family crowd, a full-blown family affair, all out of time, pell-mell. I wasn't in on the joke, unless it was coming to folk to bid us a mock farewell. I took note of when it occurred, the 23rd of September, the latest that I remember, September the 23rd. Nothing was too small or too large to capture Robert's attention. I said he was an amateur astronomer. He was also an amateur entomologist. He has a lot of poetry about insects. He's paid attention to them. And here's a very short one about fireflies. Here come real stars to fill the upper skies, and here on earth come emulating flies. That though they never equal stars in size, and they were never really stars at heart, achieve at times a very star-like start. Only, of course, they can't sustain the part. And since Robert spent a lot of time looking at the stars in the day, he looked at the sky during the day too. And maybe that's why he wrote this reflection on the color blue, fragmentary blue. He has a lot of poetry related to the clouds, the weather, the sky in general. Why make so much of fragmentary blue? In here and there a bird or butterfly or flower or wearing stone or open eye, when heaven presents in sheets the solid hue. Since earth is earth perhaps, not heaven as yet, though some savants make earth include the sky, And blue so far above us comes so high, it only gives our wish for blue a wet. I'm guessing that Elaine Good, who requested that blue might be her favorite color. And now this next poem is for Tina. It's one I've never done for an audience either. And I have no idea what it means, but it's fun. If you haven't figured out yet that Robert Frost had a good sense of humor, I think he did. Okay. Lines written in dejection on the eve of great success, and I, again, have no idea where this title comes from. I once had a cow who jumped over the moon, not onto the moon, but over. I don't know what made her so loony a loon. All she'd been having was clover. That was back in the day of my grandmother Goose. And though we are goosier now and all tanked up on mineral juice, we haven't caught up with my cow. And here's the postscript. But if over the moon I had wanted to go and had caught my cow by the tail, I'll bet she'd have made a melodious low and put her foot in the pail, than which there is no indignity worse. A cow did that once to a fellow who leapt from his milking stool with a curse and cried, I'll learn you to bellow. He couldn't lay hold of a pitchfork to hit her or give her a stab with the tine, so he leapt on her hairy back and bit her clear into her marrow spine. No doubt she would have preferred the fork. She let out a howl of rage that was heard as far away as New York and made the paper's front page. He answered her back, well, who begun it? That's what at the end of the war they always say, not who won it or what it was foughten for. And it looks like we did actually make it less than an hour. I was thinking it might take longer to get through all those poems. Did I miss any? Hope not. So, we'll do Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. I was hoping we could do this together. And then I guess if anybody wants to make additional requests, since we still have a little time, if there was one that you wished you had requested and didn't, I'll give a couple minutes at the end for that. But let's stand up and do Stopping by Woods together, because I think a lot of you know it. And if you don't, just drop out when you don't. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. And miles to go before I sleep. Thank you. Oh, look, I have a standing ovation. Do we have any additional requests over here?
Fire and ice.
Fire and ice. Okay. Yes, thanks, Luke. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I guess I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. Becky? Reluctance. Out through the fields and the woods, and over the wall I have wended. I have climbed the hills of view and looked at the world and descended. I have come by the highway home, and lo, it is ended. The leaves are all dead on the ground, save those that the oak is keeping, to ravel them one by one and let them go scraping and creeping out over the crusted snow when others are sleeping. And the dead leaves lie huddled and still, no longer blown hither and thither. The last lone aster is gone, and the flowers of the witch hazel wither. The heart is still aching to seek, but the feet question, whither? Ah, when to the heart of man was it ever less than a treason to go with the drift of things, to yield with a grace to reason, to bow and accept the end of a love or a season? Okay, so is there any others? I guess we'll call it a day.